Okay, so we're diving into something today that I think a lot of you are really curious about, and that's diet supplements, specifically the ones that promise to help you lose weight.
Right, because let's be honest, there are so many products out there,
Yeah.
and it can be tough to figure out which ones are legit and which ones are just, well, hype.
Exactly. You guys have sent in tons of questions about this, wanting to know what really works and what's just a waste of money. That's why we're doing this deep dive today. We want to give you a clear, evidence-based look at what the science actually says and what real people are experiencing.
Yeah, and we're going to do that by taking a close look at a really interesting book called Diet Supplements Revealed by Will Brink.
I'm really excited about this one. I've been looking forward to digging into this book.
Yeah, it's a great resource. Brink's approach is what makes it so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Harvard-educated scientist, so he really gets the science, but he's also a consultant to supplement companies.
He's been in the trenches, so to speak.
Right, so he understands both the science and the real-world application. He's worked with athletes, bodybuilders, and just everyday people who are trying to lose weight or improve their health.
It's kind of the best of both worlds. We get the hardcore science, but we also get that practical perspective.
Exactly. And another thing that really stands out to me about Brink is that he doesn't just focus on those isolated lab studies.
Mm-hmm.
He also places a ton of emphasis on user feedback. What are people actually experiencing when they use these supplements?
Yeah, because we all know that a supplement can look amazing on paper. All the studies look great, but then you actually try it and it doesn't do anything for you.
That's where Brink comes in. He's trying to give us the full picture, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He cuts through the marketing hype to tell us what's really going on.
So let's jump into some specific supplements. One that comes up all the time is carnitine. You see it in a lot of weight loss products. What is carnitine even supposed to do?
So, the way Brink explains it, carnitine is this crucial nutrient for how your body uses fat for fuel. So like imagine a shuttle service, carnitine, transports those fatty acids into the mitochondria of your cells.
Mitochondria, those are the powerhouses where fat gets burned, right?
Exactly. So the whole idea behind supplementing with carnitine is that you're basically boosting that shuttle service so you can get more fat into those energy factories to be burned up.
Okay, so it makes sense in theory. More carnitine equals more fat burning. But the big question is, does the research back that up?
That's the thing. Brink actually breaks down the research quite thoroughly, and there just isn't a lot of solid evidence showing that carnitine actually leads to significant weight loss in the average person.
So despite that appealing logic, it might not actually translate into real-world results.
Right. Now, Brink has received a lot of feedback over the years from people who've tried carnitine, and their experiences seem to match up with what the research says.
They're not seeing the weight loss they hoped for.
Not really. So what's Brink's overall verdict on carnitine? Well, he actually gives it a pretty poor rating when it comes to weight loss.
Interesting. So is carnitine completely useless then?
No, not necessarily. There are some important medical uses for carnitine, especially for people who have conditions that affect how they metabolize fat.
I've actually heard of doctors prescribing carnitine for those types of conditions.
Right. But for the average person just trying to shed a few pounds, it's probably not going to make a big difference.
Okay, and what about acetyl L-carnitine or ALC? Is that a similar story?
Very similar. It's often marketed as a superior form of carnitine, but the research is even less clear when it comes to weight loss, and it tends to be more expensive.
Okay, so a big takeaway for our listeners is that if you see carnitine or ALC in a weight loss product, don't automatically assume it's going to be effective.
Exactly. And here's a really important point. If you do see it listed, pay attention to the dosage. If it's a tiny amount, like 20 or 50 milligrams, it's probably not going to do much of anything.
It's just there for show on the label.
Right. And to even have a chance of seeing a benefit, you'd likely need several hundred milligrams multiple times per day.
Got it. Okay, let's move on to chromium. This one is often linked to blood sugar control. How does that tie into weight loss?
So chromium is this essential mineral, and it plays a key role in how insulin works in your body, basically, how well your body processes sugar.
And insulin is a big player in how your body stores fat.
Right, exactly. So the thinking behind chromium supplementation is that by helping insulin do its job more efficiently, it might help with weight management, maybe even reduce those intense food cravings that can make it so hard to stick to a diet.
Oh, does it actually work that way?
Well, the research on chromium and weight loss is kind of all over the place. Some early studies did show some promising results. There were even some studies that suggested it could help athletes build lean muscle.
That would be pretty incredible if it were true.
Right. But unfortunately, a lot of those early studies were later criticized for having some flaws in their designs.
So those results might not be as reliable as we initially thought.
Exactly. And then, more recent research, like around the late 90s, didn't really find any significant effects of chromium on muscle mass or body fat.
So the initial excitement around chromium kind of fizzled out.
Yeah, pretty much. And Brink mentions that in his experience, he hasn't really heard a lot of people raving about chromium for fat loss either.
So what's the final word on chromium? Is it completely worthless for weight management?
Well, Brink wouldn't say that. He does emphasize that chromium is an essential nutrient, and a lot of people might not be getting enough of it from their diet.
Especially with all the processed food we eat these days.
Exactly. Plus, things like intense exercise and a lot of sugar in your diet can actually deplete your chromium levels.
So for some people, supplementing with chromium could be beneficial even if it's not a direct weight loss miracle.
Right. He suggests a dose of around 300 to 600 micrograms per day if you think you might be deficient. And what's more, chromium is really important for regulating blood sugar, which is huge for people with conditions like Syndrome X, also known as insulin resistance.
That's where the body's cells basically become less sensitive to insulin, right?
Exactly. So while chromium is probably not going to be a magic bullet for weight loss for everyone, it's definitely an essential nutrient that plays a role in overall health.
Okay, so another one that comes up a lot is conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA. This is another one that's supposed to help with fat loss. What's the deal with CLA?
So CLA is this fatty acid that's gotten a fair amount of attention, but the research on it is kind of a mixed bag.
Mixed bag meaning?
Meaning some studies show positive results and some don't. Brink mentions a study where novice bodybuilders actually saw an increase in their strength and arm size after taking CLA without gaining any fat.
Wow, so maybe it has some muscle building effects too.
Maybe, but then you have other studies where people like weightlifters took CLA and their body weight, fat mass, and muscle mass didn't really change.
And there was even a study on healthy women where CLA didn't seem to do much either.
Right, so it's a real head scratcher.
So what does Brink ultimately say about CLA for weight loss?
Basically, he says you have to look at the research and kind of decide for yourself. But he does make a point that the low doses of CLA you often find in those general weight loss supplements, those are probably not going to be effective.
Again, probably just there to make the label look good.
Yeah, if you were going to try CLA based on some of the more positive studies, you'd probably need to take at least a few grams per day.
Okay, so this brings us to one that sounds pretty interesting, chitosan. It's actually derived from shellfish, and it's supposed to block fat absorption. How does that even work?
So chitosan is a type of fiber, and it basically works by binding to fat molecules in your digestive system.
So it's like it grabs onto the fat and prevents it from being absorbed.
Exactly. It's supposed to help you excrete more of the fat you eat rather than storing it.
Okay, that sounds almost too good to be true. What does the research say about that?
Most of the research on chitosan has actually focused on its effects on cholesterol and triglycerides.
And those are the fats that circulate in your blood, right?
Right. And in that area, the findings are generally pretty positive. Both animal and human studies suggest that chitosan can help lower those levels.
But what about actual weight loss?
When it comes to weight loss specifically, the research is much more limited, and the feedback Brink has gotten from users is mixed.
So not a slam dunk like it might sound.
Right. And Brink actually has some concerns about this whole approach of blocking fat absorption.
What are those concerns?
Well, his main worry is that fat is essential for absorbing certain nutrients, like vitamins A, D, E, and K, as well as those essential fatty acids. If you're blocking too much fat absorption, you could end up deficient in those nutrients.
That makes sense. Those are really important for overall health.
Exactly. And there's also some evidence that chitosan might interfere with the absorption of certain minerals.
So not without potential downsides.
Right. He also points out that there are probably safer and more effective ways to manage your weight.
Okay, so what if someone does want to try chitosan? What does Brink recommend?
He suggests limiting its use to maybe 8 to 12 weeks at a time and making sure to supplement with those fat-soluble vitamins, minerals, and EFAs, taking them separately from the chitosan.
Okay, and this might sound weird, but he actually recommends taking vitamin C with chitosan.
Yeah, apparently that might help enhance its effect.
Interesting. Okay, I want to briefly touch on coenzyme Q10. It's been getting a lot of buzz lately. Is there any weight loss benefit there?
Despite all the hype surrounding coenzyme Q10, Brink is pretty straightforward about it.
Yeah.
There's just not enough solid evidence to say that it helps with weight loss.
So maybe not worth focusing on for weight loss.
Right. Now let's move on to some hormonal stuff, DHEA and 7-keto-DHEA. These are often marketed for anti-aging and weight loss.
Yeah, I've seen these all over the place. What are they and do they actually work?
So DHEA is a hormone that your body naturally produces, but its levels tend to decline as you get older.
Hence the anti-aging claims.
Right. Now, a lot of the early research on DHEA was done on rodents, and they saw some really interesting effects. But Brink is careful to point out that what happens in rodents doesn't always translate to humans.
Of course, makes sense.
And when you look at the research on DHEA and weight loss in humans, the results are really mixed.
Not a clear-cut answer.
Not at all. Now, Brink does think that DHEA might have some general health benefits for older individuals, but for younger people, it's probably not going to do much for weight loss.
And what about 7-keto-DHEA? How does that compare?
7-keto-DHEA is a metabolite of DHEA, basically. It's what DHEA breaks down into.
Okay, and what's the verdict on that one?
So there's some early research, mostly on animals, that suggests it might have some thermogenic or fat-burning effects. There was even one human study where overweight women took 7-keto-DHEA for 8 weeks and did see a small amount of weight loss.
Okay, so maybe a glimmer of hope there.
Yeah, but Brink stresses that we need a lot more research before we can say for sure whether 7-keto-DHEA is a reliable weight loss aid.
Got it. So, moving on to something a little less complicated, digestive enzymes. Can those help with weight loss?
Honestly, Brink's take on this is pretty simple. Digestive enzymes are great for, well, digestion. They help your body break down food and absorb nutrients. But they're not really designed to directly influence weight loss.
Makes sense. So not a weight loss magic bullet.
Not really. All right, now for a combination that gets a lot of attention, both good and bad, ephedrine and caffeine, also known as the EC stack.
This one's a bit controversial, right?
It is. But here's the thing. There's actually a ton of research on EC, and it consistently shows that it can be very effective for weight loss. We're talking studies published in really reputable journals like the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition.
So it's not just anecdotal evidence. There's actual experience backing it up.
Absolutely. And a lot of these studies have used a ratio of 10 parts caffeine to 1 part ephedrine.
I've also heard it called the ECA stack, where aspirin is added to the mix. What about that?
Yeah, some people think the aspirin boosts the effects, but there's actually not a ton of research to support that.
So EC might be enough on its own.
Right. Now, of course, ephedrine does have some potential side effects, and Brink is very clear about that.
Which is why it's so important to be careful with it, right?
Absolutely. But he also points out that a lot of the concerns about ephedrine are overblown. He cites studies that show weight loss with minimal side effects in healthy people, and he even mentions a Harvard Medical School study that concluded there were no significant changes in things like heart rate, blood pressure, or cholesterol levels.
So it might be safer than some people think.
Maybe. But again, it's really important to be aware of the potential side effects. People with certain conditions, like high blood pressure, should definitely avoid EC.
And pregnant women shouldn't use it either.
Right. It's also crucial not to exceed the recommended dosages. And Brink suggests starting with lower doses to see how you tolerate it.
Okay, so EC can be effective, but definitely proceed with caution and consult with a doctor before using it. All right, shifting gears now to something a bit more foundational. Essential fatty acids, or EFAs. We know they're good for us, but can they help with weight loss?
They definitely can. Brink is a huge advocate for EFAs, especially omega-3s, because they play such a crucial role in overall health.
And those are the ones that are often lacking in our modern diets.
Exactly. And omega-3s are not only anti-inflammatory, but they can actually help boost your metabolism and even influence how your genes are expressed.
Wow, that's pretty powerful stuff.
Right. And studies have shown that fish oil and flax oil can help with weight loss.
I know Brink is a big fan of flax oil.
He is. He actually played a big role in popularizing flax oil for fat loss, especially in the bodybuilding world. He generally recommends 1 to 3 tablespoons per day.
And he's also big on antioxidants.
Oh, yeah. He always stresses taking things like vitamin C and E and selenium along with your flax oil.
Okay, let's talk about growth hormone, or GH. There are so many supplements out there that claim to boost GH naturally. Do any of them actually work?
Brink is pretty skeptical about these GH-boosting supplements. He just doesn't see the evidence to support those claims.
So all that marketing about naturally boosting GH levels might be misleading.
It seems that way. He says that these over-the-counter products probably can't raise GH levels high enough to make a real difference in terms of fat loss or muscle gain. And even with actual GH injections, which are a whole other story, the muscle gain you see is often mostly water retention.
So the bottom line is don't get your hopes up about those GH boosting supplements.
Right. Okay, now for something that's actually backed by some good research, green tea extract.
I love green tea. It's so good for you.
It is. And Brink agrees. He sees a lot of promise in green tea extract, both for weight loss and overall health. It contains caffeine, which can boost your metabolism, but it also has these powerful antioxidants called catechins.
And those catechins are what make green tea so beneficial, right?
They're a big part of it, for sure. And research suggests that green tea extract might be even better than caffeine alone when it comes to burning fat.
Plus, it has all those other amazing health benefits.
Right, it can help lower blood pressure, protect your heart, maybe even help prevent certain types of cancer.
Okay, so green tea is a definite winner.
For sure. Now let's talk about Google lipids. This one's a bit more complex because it's often talked about for both its cholesterol-lowering effects and its potential impact on thyroid function.
And the thyroid connection is why people think it might help with weight loss, right?
Exactly. A healthy thyroid is crucial for a healthy metabolism. But here's the thing. Most of the research on Google has focused on its cholesterol-lowering effects, and it seems to be pretty effective for that.
So maybe not so much for weight loss.
The research on weight loss specifically is much less clear, and the feedback Brink has gotten is mixed.
Okay, and what about those supplements that combine Google with phosphates?
That's an interesting one. There's some research suggesting that this combination might work synergistically to enhance fat loss.
Synergistically meaning?
Meaning they work better together than they do alone. Brink compares it to the synergy between ephedrine and caffeine.
Interesting. So maybe something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, but he still thinks EC is probably more effective overall.
Okay, another one I've seen mentioned is glycomacropeptides, or GMP. They're supposed to help with appetite control.
Right, GMP is actually a component of whey protein, and it can stimulate the release of this hormone called CCK, which helps you feel full and satisfied after eating.
So you feel fuller, you eat less, you lose weight.
That's the idea. But even though whey protein does seem to make dieting easier for a lot of people, we don't really know for sure if GMP is the reason why.
So more research is needed.
Definitely. All right, how about hydroxycitric acid, or HCA? This one comes from the Garcinia cambogia fruit, and it's supposed to block fat synthesis.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. Does it work?
You know, Brink is a bit skeptical about this one. The research on HCA is pretty limited, and the results haven't been that impressive.
So maybe not the miracle fat blocker it's hyped up to be.
Right. But he does mention that some people might see some benefit, so it might be worth trying a small dose to see how you respond.
Okay, fair enough. Now, what about those supplements that are labeled as lipotropics? That seems like a very broad term.
It is. Lipotropics basically refers to a whole bunch of different nutrients that are supposed to help prevent fat storage and support detoxification.
So things like choline and inositol.
Yeah, exactly. But because it's such a broad category, it's hard to study lipotropics as a whole.
And what does Brink have to say about them for weight loss?
He doesn't really see a lot of convincing evidence to suggest that they're all that effective for weight loss specifically.
Okay, so maybe not the most reliable option. Now, another one I wanted to ask about is L-tyrosine. It's an amino acid, and it's often included in pre-workout supplements.
Yeah, and some people think it might also help with weight loss.
What does Brink have to say about that?
So L-tyrosine is a precursor to some really important neurotransmitters. Those are the chemical messengers in your brain. And it also plays a role in thyroid hormone production.
And all of that is related to your metabolism, right?
Absolutely. There's some limited research suggesting that tyrosine might enhance the thermogenic effects of ephedrine, although it doesn't seem to do much on its own.
So maybe not a standalone weight loss solution.
Right. There's also some evidence that tyrosine might help lower cortisol levels, which could be good for managing stress, especially for athletes.
Interesting. So maybe more of a supportive role than a direct fat burner.
That seems to be the consensus. Now, another one that has a somewhat unique mechanism is medium-chain triglycerides, or MCTs.
I've heard of these. They're metabolized differently than other types of fat, right?
Exactly. They're absorbed and processed more quickly, and they go straight to your liver, so they're more readily available for energy.
So the logic is that they're less likely to be stored as fat.
Right. And animal studies have actually shown some promising results with MCTs for fat loss.
But what about humans?
Unfortunately, the results in humans haven't been as impressive. Studies looking at weight loss specifically have generally been pretty disappointing.
So maybe not the weight loss miracle some people were hoping for?
Probably not. Brink doesn't really recommend them for weight loss based on the current evidence.
Okay, last but not least, peptide FM, also called Globin Digest. This one's a bit more obscure. What's the story here?
So peptide FM is derived from proteins, and it has shown some really interesting properties in research, both in the lab and in animals. It seems to potentially block the absorption of both fat and carbs.
That's a pretty powerful combination if it works.
Right. And it also seems to boost fat burning and inhibit those enzymes that promote fat storage. Studies in animals have actually shown a reduction in body fat and lower triglyceride levels.
So it might actually live up to its claims?
It's possible. There have also been some human clinical trials that show promising results. But of course, more research is always needed.
Okay, and finally, pyruvate. It's a byproduct of glucose metabolism, but can it also help with weight loss?
So pyruvate is actually pretty well studied, and there's some evidence that it can help people lose weight, especially when they're also following a calorie-restricted diet.
Okay, so maybe not a standalone solution, but potentially helpful in combination with a diet.
Right. There's even some research suggesting it might help prevent weight regain after you've lost weight, which is a big challenge for a lot of people.
Definitely. So pyruvate might be worth exploring further.
Absolutely. Okay, one more I want to cover. Synephrine, which comes from bitter orange extract. It's often marketed as a safer alternative to ephedrine.
That's a bold claim. Does it actually hold up?
Well, synephrine is structurally similar to ephedrine, and it does act as a stimulant. The idea is that it targets specific receptors in your body, particularly in brown adipose tissue, or BA, which is a type of fat that's involved in burning calories.
So it's supposed to boost your metabolism by activating this BA.
Right. And there's actually been a ton of research on this, especially in animals. But here's the catch. Adult humans don't have a lot of BAT.
So what works in rats and mice might not work in people.
Exactly. And because of that, Brink is pretty skeptical about synephrine for weight loss in adults.
Makes sense. All right, finally, Yohimbine. This one is often touted for its ability to target stubborn fat, like in the thighs.
Yeah, that's the big selling point.
Yeah.
And Yohimbine does work by blocking certain receptors that can make it harder to lose fat from those stubborn areas.
So the mechanism is there, but does it actually work?
The research is kind of all over the place. Some studies show a benefit while others don't.
And there are some potential side effects to be aware of, right?
Definitely.
Right,
Especially if you combine it with other stimulants.
So Yohimbine might be worth considering, but definitely proceed with caution. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. To help sum it all up for our listeners, can you give us a quick rundown of which supplements Brink considers most likely to be effective, which ones might be worth a try but need more research, and which ones he thinks are probably not worth your money?
Sure. So Brink puts EC, ephedrine, and caffeine in the likely effective category.
Sure.
But again, with the caveat that you need to be very careful with it. Then there are a handful that he thinks could be worth a try, but the research is mixed or the feedback hasn't been that impressive. Those include CLA, 7-keto DHEA, GMP, peptide FM, synephrine, and Yohimbine. And finally, there are several that he thinks you're probably better off skipping altogether, at least for weight loss. Those are carnitine, ALC, chromium, chitosan, coenzyme Q10, DHEA, digestive enzymes, and GH releasers.
That's super helpful. Now, Brink also emphasizes that supplements are just one part of the equation when it comes to losing weight.
Absolutely. He's a big believer in getting the fundamentals right first, which means diet and exercise.
And when he talks about exercise, he really stresses the importance of weight training, right?
He does. He says that building muscle is absolutely essential for increasing your metabolism and burning more calories, even when you're not working out.
So hitting the weights is key.
Yeah, he even suggests that if you're short on time, weight training should be your priority over cardio.
Interesting. Now, what about the diet itself? What are some of Brink's key recommendations for eating for fat loss?
He's all about eating clean and focusing on whole, unprocessed foods. He recommends adjusting your carb intake based on your activity level, and he's a big fan of complex carbs, like oatmeal, lentils, brown rice, and sweet potatoes.
So the good carbs.
Exactly. He's also not afraid of protein. He actually recommends eating a decent amount of protein, especially if you're working out regularly.
And what about fat?
He's definitely not a fan of those low-fat diets. He thinks healthy fats are essential, especially those omega-3s. He provides a whole list of healthy fats to include in your diet and unhealthy fats to avoid. And of course, he's big on fiber, especially from vegetables. He also recommends eating several smaller meals throughout the day to keep your blood sugar stable and your metabolism humming.
So it's not just about cutting calories, it's about making sure you're getting the right nutrients.
Right, and he's really big on the idea that lasting fat loss is a biochemical process. It's not just about willpower, it's about understanding how your body works and giving it what it needs to burn fat effectively.
It's about working with your body, not against it.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the world of diet supplements. Thank you so much for breaking it all down for us.
My pleasure.
And for all of you listening, I hope this has given you a better understanding of what works, what doesn't, and what might be worth exploring further. Just remember that the most effective solutions aren't always the ones with the flashiest marketing. Take the time to really understand how your body responds to different foods and supplements, and don't be afraid to experiment a bit to find what works best for you. And as always, if you have any underlying health conditions or are taking medications, be sure to consult with your doctor before trying any new supplements.